You are standing on the humid, muddy banks of the Potomac River. It's early morning, mid-July, 1790. Around you, there are no marble monuments, no paved avenues, and certainly no White House. Instead, there is an oppressive wall of fog, the suffocating smell of damp earth, and the relentless, high-pitched whine of mosquitoes. Insects so thick and aggressive that the locals joke they are the unofficial state bird of Maryland. To your left, dense forests of oak and hickory stretch toward the horizon. To your right, the slow-moving, silt-heavy waters of the river lap against a shoreline choked with reeds and rotting timber. You look down at your boots. They are already sinking into the muck. This isn't a city, it's a bog. Specifically, you are standing in Foggy Bottom, a low-lying stretch of land that will one day house the Department of State, but right now, it's just a breeding ground for malaria and stagnant pools of water. The air is so heavy with moisture you can almost chew it. You've been told this is to be the future seat of empire, the permanent capital of a brand new nation. But looking at the tangled briars and the wild turkeys calling in the brush, it feels less like a grand capital and more like a cruel, elaborate joke. Just a few days ago, on July 16th, President George Washington signed the Residence Act into law. It was the result of a backroom deal so controversial it nearly tore the young United States apart before it even began. For years, the government has been a nomad, wandering from the sophisticated cobblestones of Philadelphia to the docks of New York. The Northerners want a center of trade. The Southerners want a capital in the heart of the agrarian South. But why here? Why choose this mosquito-infested wilderness over a built city? You don't know it yet, but you are standing in the middle of the most audacious real estate gamble in history. A gamble fueled by debt, driven by ego, and built on a foundation of secrets. Welcome to 24 Hours in the Birth of Washington, D.C. To understand why you are sinking in this Potomac mud, we have to travel back 3 months and 200 miles north to a candlelit dining room in New York City. You are no longer in the wild. You are at the residence of Thomas Jefferson on Maiden Lane. The air here doesn't smell of swamp gas, but of expensive French wine and roasted mutton. This is the room where it happens. Sitting across from each other are the two most powerful rivals in America. Alexander Hamilton, the ambitious Treasury Secretary with the vision of a global financial empire, and James Madison, the soft-spoken but fierce protector of Southern interests. They are at a total deadlock. Hamilton wants the federal government to take over the massive debts the states ran up during the Revolution. The North loves it. The South, which has already paid most of its debts, sees it as a power grab, a financial monster. The tension is thick enough to cut with a steak knife. If they don't reach a deal, the United States might collapse before its 10th birthday. Jefferson, playing the role of the ultimate host, pours more wine. Then the whisper of a trade begins. Hamilton needs the votes for his debt plan. Madison wants the capital moved away from the pro-Northern influence of New York and Philadelphia. The deal is struck in the shadows. The South will allow the federal government to control the nation's money, but in exchange, the North must agree to move the capital to a permanent site on the Potomac River. It's a classic political trade-off. Northern money for Southern soil. On July 16th, the Residence Act is passed. But as the candles burn low, a chilling question remains. Can a grand city, a seat of empire, actually be willed into existence by 3 men over a bottle of wine? Or have they just traded the nation's future for a map of a swamp that no one can build on? The plan is on paper. Now, the nightmare of reality begins. 6 a.m. The sun hasn't broken the horizon yet, but the work has already begun. You are deep in the woods of Maryland, following a team of men through a landscape that feels like a green labyrinth. Leading the group is Andrew Ellicott, the chief surveyor, but your eyes are drawn to the man standing beside him, adjusting a heavy brass instrument known as a zenith sector. This is Benjamin Banneker. He is a self-taught mathematician, an astronomer, and a free black man. In an era where Thomas Jefferson, the very man who helped pick this site, publicly doubts the intellectual capacity of black people, Banneker is here as the indispensable brain of the project. While others see only trees and muck, Banneker sees the geometry of the universe. He spends his nights lying on his back, staring at the stars, recording their movements to fix the exact latitude and longitude of this new federal district. He is mapping a 10-mile square, the diamond shape that will define D.C. Today, you watch as they prepare to set one of the 40 boundary stones. These aren't just rocks, they are the physical anchors of a dream. But there is a shadow hanging over the planning office. The lead architect, Pierre L'Enfant, is a man of legendary temper. There are whispers that if he doesn't get his way, he might walk away and take the only copies of the city's master plan with him. If that happens, the seat of empire becomes a blank page. Who could possibly remember the location of every grand avenue, every circle, and every secret corridor in a city that hasn't been built yet? You look at Banneker's ink-stained hands and realize the entire future of the United States Capitol might currently reside inside this one man's mind. But as the sun rises, a different sound begins to echo through the trees. Not the quiet scratching of a surveyor's quill, but the rhythmic, bone-deep thud of iron hitting stone. The labor has begun. 9 a.m. The Maryland sun is already a physical weight on your shoulders. You walk toward Jenkins Hill, the site Pierre L'Enfant calls a pedestal waiting for a monument. But today, it's a site of raw, back-breaking labor. The air is thick with the smell of wood smoke and the sharp, alkaline scent of curing lime. You hear it before you see it. The rhythmic, metallic scream of long iron saws biting into massive blocks of Aquia Creek sandstone. This is the workforce of the new capital, and it isn't what the history books will always show you. You don't see those in white togas. You see black men, their torsos glistening with sweat, muscles strained to the breaking point as they hoist timber and haul silt. These men are enslaved. The young federal government, desperate to save money and lacking a local labor pool, is hiring them from nearby plantation owners. The government pays the masters, but the men pay with their lives. They are the ones clearing the ancient oaks to make way for the grand avenues. They are the ones firing bricks in massive kilns that glow like angry eyes in the woods. They are the ones deep in the muddy trenches, laying the very foundation of what will be called the Temple of Liberty. There is a profound, haunting silence in their toil. It is the ultimate American paradox. A city designed to represent the rights of man is being built by men with no rights at all. You watch a laborer guide a horse-drawn sled carrying a 3-ton slab of stone. He works with a precision that belies his status as property. One day, a man like him, Philip Reed, will be the only person capable of casting the Statue of Freedom that sits atop the dome. But right now, they are just Negro hire in the ledger books, anonymous, essential, and shackled to the birth of an empire. If the foundation is built on such a contradiction, what kind of shadow will this city cast over the next 2 centuries? Midday. You leave the muddy trenches of the capital and head west toward Georgetown. This is where the real world exists. Unlike the silent, swampy federal district, Georgetown is loud, filthy, and thriving. You hear the iron-rimmed wheels of tobacco wagons screeching against stone, the braying of mules, and the multilingual shouting of sailors at the docks. Georgetown is the lifeblood of this project. the only place where you can find a decent meal, a dry bed, or a dangerous rumor. You step into a crowded tavern, perhaps Suitors or Fountain Inn. The air is a thick soup of pipe smoke, fried salt pork, and cheap rum. But people aren't here just to drink. They are here to gamble on the future. On every wooden table you see maps, Pierre L'Enfant's maps. Men are pointing at ink-drawn squares that currently exist only as brambles and marshes. This is land fever. The wealthiest men in America, like Robert Morris, the financier of the Revolution, are buying up thousands of these paper lots. They are convinced that as soon as the government arrives, these mudflats will be worth more than gold. It is a massive, unregulated speculative bubble. You see a merchant frantically counting Continental certificates, trying to buy a lot near what L'Enfant calls Pennsylvania Avenue. He doesn't know that in a few years, many of these men, including Morris himself, will end up in debtor's prison because of these very maps. There is a frantic, almost desperate energy in the room. Everyone is trying to get rich off a city that isn't there yet. It feels less like building a nation and more like a high-stakes card game in a burning house. You realize that Washington, D.C. wasn't just born from a political compromise, it was born from a fever dream of greed. But as you look at the maps, you notice something strange. L'Enfant's vision is so grand, so Irish-Parisian in its scale that it seems impossible. And the man himself? He's just down the street, and he's about to start a war with the very people paying for his dream. 2 p.m. The humidity is at its peak, a thick blanket that makes every movement an effort. You find yourself standing near the base of Capitol Hill, where a man is shouting, not at the laborers, but at a group of wealthy federal commissioners. He is dressed in a worn Continental Army uniform, his wig slightly askew, his face flushed with a mixture of artistic genius and sheer, unadulterated rage. This is Major Pierre Charles L'Enfant, the French-born visionary hand-picked by George Washington to design the city. L'Enfant doesn't see a mosquito-infested swamp. He sees a new Paris. He is tracing invisible lines in the air with his cane, describing massive, 160-foot-wide diagonal avenues that will cut across the landscape like rays of light. He wants grand circles, public fountains, and a presidential palace that would make European kings jealous. To L'Enfant, this isn't just a town, it is a seat of empire, a physical manifestation of American greatness. But there is a massive problem. L'Enfant is a brilliant architect, but a catastrophic politician. He treats the local landowners, the very people who ceded the land, like obstacles in the way of his art. You've heard the scandal of the week. A powerful local resident, Daniel Carroll, began building a house that sat directly in the path of one of L'Enfant's planned avenues. Instead of negotiating or waiting for a legal order, L'Enfant simply commanded his men to tear the house down. In one night, he turned a powerful elite into a mortal enemy. The commissioners are furious. They want a practical, cost-effective capital that can be built quickly. L'Enfant wants a masterpiece at any price. The tension is reaching a breaking point. You hear the whispers in the taverns. L'Enfant might be fired. If he goes, he has vowed to take his maps, the only master copies of the city's layout, with him. Without those maps, the dream of Washington, D.C. could die in the mud before a single brick is laid. But remember the quiet man you saw at dawn? The one recording the stars. He's been watching L'Enfant's work too, and he has a memory that might just save a nation. 4 p.m. You are 40 miles south of the city to be, at a place called Aquia Creek. If you thought the swamp was a nightmare, this is a furnace. The heat here is trapped by the high rock walls of the quarry, vibrating with the deafening, rhythmic clink, clink, clink of iron chisels. The air isn't just humid, It's thick with a fine, white powder that coats your lungs and turns the sweat on your skin into a gritty paste. Look at the stone being pulled from the earth. This is Virginia freestone, a pale, elegant sandstone. On paper, it looks like Roman marble. In reality, it's soft, porous, and incredibly temperamental. And who is extracting it? Once again, you see the dark engine of the Capitol. Enslaved men, standing knee-deep in muddy water at the bottom of the pits, are using massive timber cranes to hoist 6-ton blocks into the air. These men are the invisible hands behind the White House and the Capitol. They spend 12 hours a day sawing through rock with nothing but sand, water, and brute strength. You see a stonecutter wiping dust from his eyes. His hands are a roadmap of scars and calluses. He is preparing a block that will one day form a column in the president's house. But there is a terrifying secret about this stone. Because it's so porous, it acts like a giant sponge. If a winter freeze hits, the water inside the stone will expand and shatter the very foundations of the government. The architects are panicking. They need a way to seal the rock, to hide its flaws, and to stop it from crumbling. Their solution: a thick, heavy coating of white lime wash. You realize then, the White House won't be white because of a grand aesthetic choice. It will be painted white to keep it from falling apart. As the sun begins to dip, the massive blocks are loaded onto flat-bottomed boats to begin their slow, dangerous journey up the Potomac. But as the day ends for the laborers, the night is just beginning for the man who holds the ultimate power over this land. 6 p.m. The sun is setting behind the hills of Virginia, casting long golden shadows across the Potomac. You are standing near the riverbank when you see him. He is tall, sitting perfectly upright on a large white horse. His gaze is fixed on the horizon, silent and unmoving. There is no crowd, no fanfare. Just George Washington, the President of the United States, out for an evening inspection of his grand project. To the rest of the world, he is the general who won the Revolution. But here, in the mud of 1790, he is something else: a master real estate developer. While Jefferson and Hamilton argue over political philosophy, Washington is the one actually getting his hands dirty. He is the silent conductor behind every chaotic detail you've seen today. He has a massive personal stake in this. He owns Mount Vernon just a few miles downriver. He is a primary investor in the Potomac Company, a venture designed to make this river the gateway to the American West. If this city succeeds, Washington doesn't just build a capital. He creates a financial empire centered around his own land. To him, the federal city isn't just a national necessity, it's a personal legacy. But he is facing a war of his own. He has spent weeks in Georgetown, engaged in grueling negotiations with 19 obstinate proprietors, the local plantation owners who don't care about seats of empire. They want money. They want to keep their tobacco fields. Washington has had to use every ounce of his immense prestige to pressure them into signing over their property, promising them that their muddy fields will one day be the most valuable boulevards in the world. As he watches the torches flicker at the construction sites, Washington knows a secret that keeps him up at night. He only has 10 years. The Residence Act states that the government must move here by 1800. If the buildings aren't ready, the capital stays in Philadelphia, and his Potomac dream vanishes forever. He turns his horse and rides away. The nation's future rests on the speed of a shovel. It's 9 p.m. You're in Georgetown, but the morning's breezy docks are a distant memory. You step into Souter's Tavern, a modest, 2-story wooden frame building that serves as the beating heart of a federal city not yet born. Inside, the air is thick with the heavy scent of Virginia tobacco, the tang of sweat, and the sharp, biting aroma of Caribbean rum. This is no place for rest. This is where political schemes are hatched, and backroom deals simmer under the flicker of dying candlelight. At oil-stained wooden tables, men huddle over maps of parchment. They are federal commissioners, surveyors, and anxious real estate speculators. The tension here is more stifling than the afternoon heat from the brick kilns. Maryland and Virginia have ceded their land, but now the cracks are showing. The Southerners are spooked. They fear that if the project stalls, Northern politicians will find any excuse to keep the capital in Philadelphia forever. At this moment, D.C. feels like a premature child, caught in a tug-of-war between conflicting ambitions. Low-voiced curses follow the name Pierre l'Enfant. The French architect has just stormed out after a blistering row with the authorities. L'Enfant has refused to hand over his plans, fearing the commissioners will butcher his artistic vision. Imagine it, an entire nation waiting for its capital, yet the city's DNA, the intricate blueprints of its avenues and grand squares, resides solely in the mind of an arrogant man threatening to walk away with them. In the tavern's shadows, a grim reality sets in. Washington, D.C. in 1790 is not a rising empire. It is a fragile gamble on the brink of collapse. If the designs are lost, if the coffers run dry, this place will remain nothing more than the muddy marshes of Foggy Bottom. But just as despair begins to take hold, a silhouette appears in the doorway. Benjamin Banneker has returned. He carries with him a secret that could save the city, something L'Enfant never saw coming. Midnight. The torches have long since flickered out. You stand once more on the banks of the Potomac, but the fog has grown so thick that Georgetown has vanished from sight. Behind you, the silence of the woods is broken only by the chorus of bullfrogs in the marshes of Foggy Bottom. It's hard to believe that this emptiness is the blueprint for a superpower. You think back on the last 24 hours. You saw the secret dinner where a nation's debt was traded for a location. You saw Benjamin Banneker, the man who saved the city's geometry when the architect fled with the maps. You saw the sweat and the chains of the enslaved men whose labor is literally baked into the bricks of the White House. Washington, D.C. was never just a city, it was a statement. Pierre l'Enfant wanted a monument to glory. George Washington wanted a legacy for his river. But the reality you've walked through today is a story of pragmatism, greed, and a crushing human cost. As you look toward the future, to the year 2026, you see a city of white marble and global influence. But the swamp never truly left. The contradictions of 1790 are still there. The fight for representation, and the echoes of those who built the halls they couldn't enter. Washington, D.C. didn't just appear, it was carved out of the mud by sheer will. You've witnessed the birth of an empire. Welcome to Chronicles of Time. Hit subscribe to explore more. Which city should we reconstruct next? The fog is rolling in, the past is fading, but the ghosts of 1790 are still there,